News from climate talks, where countries have agreed on a deal to inject at least $300 billion annually in humanity's fight against climate change, aimed at helping poor nations cope with the ravages of global warming. Now, the $300 billion will go to developing countries that need the cash to wean themselves off of coal, oil, and gas that causes the globe to overheat, adapt to future warming, and pay for the damage caused by climate change extreme weather. The talks at the UN Climate Summit, COP29, in Azerbaijan ran 33 hours late and came within inches of collapse. It is not near the full amount of $1.3 trillion that the developing countries were asking for, but it is 3 times the $100 billion a year from the 2009 that is expiring. Now, delegations say that this deal is headed in the right direction and hopes that money will flow in the future. It's part of a plan to keep cutting pollution with new targets every 5 years, which the world agreed to at the UN talks in Paris in 2015.
In the meantime, delegates of developing countries have been reacting to that UN climate talks agreement on a $300 billion a year for humanity's fight against climate change. India's negotiator, Shandi Reina, called it a paltry sum, and Nigeria's Nkiruka Madukwe, CEO of the National Council on Climate Change, calling the deal an insult and a joke. She also said it was unrealistic and that developed countries need to take more responsibility for their historical and current role in worsening climate change.
Your Excellency, trust is the basis for all action. And this incident is indicative of a lack of trust, a lack of collaboration on an issue which is a global challenge which is faced by all of us and most of all by the developing countries that are not responsible for it. The developing countries are most impacted by climate change. In addition to our development priorities, we have to contend with the additional stresses and crises of climate. The global south is being pushed to transit to low-carbon pathways, even at the cost of our growth. The goal is too little, too distant. It is 2035, it's too far gone. Our 2030 estimates tell us that we need to do it at 1.3 trillion per year till 2030. But we have only been agreeable to have, or we have a proposal that talks about $300 billion mobilization goal. It does not address the needs and priorities of developing countries. It is incompatible with the principle of CBDRC and equity. Regardless of our battle with impacts of climate change, it is a fact that developing countries are accused continuously of emissions, forgetting the high per capita emissions of the developed countries, forgetting also the historical responsibilities of the developed countries. This only adds to the problem at hand for us, and the proposed goal shall not solve anything for us. In fact, we have to implement ambitious NDCs and economic challenges that we need to navigate and address the adaptation needs. The amount that is proposed to be mobilized is abysmally poor. It's a paltry sum. It is not something that will enable conducive climate action that is necessary for the survival of our country and for the growth of our people, their livelihoods. And I'm sorry to say that we cannot accept it.
If we walk back home with 300 and we say that the developed countries are taking the lead, this is an insult to what the convention says. Should I remind us of what the convention says? That it noted that developed countries had the largest share of historical and current global emissions. This might be 1994, but it's still very current till now. It also said that the developed countries will take the lead, and this lead is climate finance. That the developing country is saying that it's taking the lead with $300 billion till 2035 is a joke. And it's not something we should take lightly. I do not think it's something we should clap our hands and force us to take it. But we have a right as countries to choose if we're going to take this or not. And I'm saying that we do not accept this. You expect us to have ambitious NDCs. The NCQG was supposed to enable us to have realistic finance goals. $300 billion is unrealistic.
Well, we will not accept these words from Nigeria's Nkiruka Maduekwe. Very emotional. You could tell that they were not happy with this deal. And, you know, the expectations, the shortfall of these expectations, of course, developing nations had initially demanded $1.3 trillion a year. And that was the expectation that it would run like that up until 2035. So to now see this, response from developed countries saying, no, the best that we can do is $300 billion. I understand why they are reacting like that. And, you know, despite the improvement over the previous $100 billion, because it was $100 billion as of, that was the annual pledge that was committed before from 2009, it's still seen as this funding being insufficient, given the scale of the climate crisis. However, it's interesting to hear that U.S. President Biden is praising this agreement, and he's saying, calling it a historic step in the right direction, you know, tying it to opportunities for American industries, while President-elect Donald Trump's intention to withdraw from the Paris Agreement in itself for a second time even cast doubts on the US's long-term agreement. But if you look at the analysis of what has happened, is a situation where it's like progress versus limitations. It is a significant increase, yes, but it falls short of what is needed to adequately address climate change impacts in vulnerable nations. The money simply isn't enough. And we're continuing to see this tension between nations where the deal, of course, is highlighting the growing frustrations, as you could clearly see there, between developing nations. And it seems as if there is a lack of urgency or a lack of, fairness in international climate negotiations. And this division again underscores the challenges in achieving a certain consensus in multilateral climate diplomacy, but there's still an opportunity for growth because there's still so much that can be done with $300 billion. So it might not be enough, but exactly what steps are going to be taken, even with the $100 billion that was pledged in the past, what exactly has been done? Because when it comes to, you know, these huge amounts of money, there's always a declaration, but when it comes to breaking it down to exactly what it's used for, it always still seems very opaque and very vague.
Yeah, well said, Shaitan, and I like the fact that your voice, cues behind the voices of the two strong women who spoke, in Azerbaijan, the Indian lady and our own Nkiruka Maduekwe. I think that they highlighted what the issues were, very strongly. Yes, like you, I acknowledge the fact that since 2009, when the pledge of $100 billion annually was made in, I believe that was in Copenhagen, in Denmark, you could say that they have stayed with the commitment that they made. But like the question that you asked, what specifically has that been used for? Which developing countries have been weaned appreciably, of oil and gas, and was the measurement of progress? Because that will be important to determine what this 300 billion naira, annual pledge will do, as against the expected 1.3 trillion, dollars up till 2035. I'm not so sure how precisely money will win developing countries of what the president, or is it the prime minister of Azerbaijan, who's the chief host of COP29 this time around, is saying that oil and gas are a gift from God. And that what money are you offering us to stop this just because of pollution, because you yourself, you have not sufficiently addressed those things. So I do not know any country that the money from COP has assisted in winning them of this thing and making appreciable effort in reducing pollution In America, fracking is still an issue. Everybody is still talking, even in the last campaign, to ban or not to ban fracking. And it was a factor in who eventually, became the president. So for me, there is nothing to say other than to applaud what India and Nigeria and a few other countries have said. Maybe something better will happen, but the point is that given what was said initially in 1994 about the fact that core responsibility lies with the developed countries, nothing has changed. Nothing really has changed.
Well, I'll say that, especially in applauding India, India is one of the countries that has been going into using more clean fuels, clean gas, transition fuels. Even in Nigeria now, we have a presidential initiative on CNG. The issue here is that, as you both have rightly said, the developed countries have contributed more to climate change. However, the global south suffers more from climate change. And we talk about it very often here because we talk about climate shocks in Nigeria. We talk about flooding, affecting most states in this country in the last 2 years have had to deal with severe flooding issues. We also have drought in some states. In Kwara State, there was droughts. Farmers, I heard of some farmers committing suicide. We're having extreme climate shocks here. And beyond that also, a lot of countries in the global south are resource dependent for their economies. Nigeria needs oil for our GDP. We need oil to be able to fuel our economy. And so we cannot make our resources stranded here because the global north no longer needs it.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, even if we're saying that $300 billion is an improvement from $100 billion. By the time we add inflation, we'll see that the nominal value might be higher, but the real value is possibly lower. And you also have countries, even such as South Africa, that need coal. And you have a country like Britain that even use coal from Enugu to fuel their own economy, use coal from northern England to fuel their own economy, but are now saying that, if you use that same coal, you have to pay a credit on that. You have to, pay a tax on that. You'll be punished for that. And so this inequitable system is very not beneficial, particularly for us here. And everyone's talking about energy transition, but it has to be just, because again, we're still energy poor. We're talking about most people in Nigeria don't even have access to electricity to begin with. So I really do applaud what we saw from India and Nigeria, and I think it also shows, it's also reflective of what we saw when the Indian president came here. At the end of the day, people in the global south and countries in the global south must ally with each other in order for us to be able to propel ourselves forward. Because the West is definitely not going to do that.
That's it.